Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm Kale, as you know, and we're here for episode 41. We're recording on a Friday morning. Rod, I know you've got some business to attend to this weekend, but what's on your mind, man?
What's on my mind is more like what's on my stomach. Last night, a friend flew into town on his own plane. He's a small pilot. He's a big supporter of the American Conservative, my pal Ed Greer, and he listens to our podcast.
Nice. Hello, Ed. Hello, Ed. Hi.
Yeah, and anyway, he flew in, and I got, since you and I talked last, I got a formal deal to do my next book. And I said, Ed, come out with me. Let's celebrate this book deal. So even though in the Orthodox Church, we're in the Nativity fast now, which is no meat, no dairy till Christmas, we went to Ruth's Chris because I'm not going to miss a chance to celebrate with my good friend. And
so you went last night?
We went last night. We had
my mom and dad were there last night.
Are you serious?
Yeah, really. My dad's 80th birthday is today, and they could only get a reservation yesterday. So they were there at the same time as you, brother.
Man, it is not a fancy steakhouse, but it was so hard to get a reservation there, even on a Thursday night, because place is jammed. And when you taste that food, you're like, this is why. Anyway, so I've been, again, since you and I talked, I started a new diet thing, Noom. You know that?
Oh,
it's
It's
a Megan McArdle of the Washington Post. I saw her at National Conservatism. She said, she looks really good. She's lost a lot of weight. She said, everybody in Washington is doing Noom. I'm like, what's that? And anyway, it's an app that it helps you. And one of the main thing it does for me is it helps you track calories. I've been eating so well this week. Then I go to Ruth's Chris last night, a bottle of Bordeaux, big T-bone. It's all over, brother.
Oh, that T-bone.
All of which is to say that I'm a little logy this morning.
Yeah.
Let's talk about real things.
Yeah. Well, so look, there's tons going on. I mean, we could talk about, the Rittenhouse situation, which seems to be unraveling pretty awfully. I mean, they're anticipating, blow up. Kind of, if he is found not guilty, it looks like they're very worried that things are going to blow up. There continues to be all of this chatter, I know, on your blog and on Twitter about all things post-liberal and all of that.
Do we really have to talk about that?
No, we don't.
No, we can't. I'm just joking.
Okay.
It's there's a lot of Tsuris there.
Yeah, and then of course you mentioned the National Conservatism Conference and your good friend and someone I do like, but oftentimes have problems with his sort of super duper normieism, David Brooks. Reported on the conference. And well, where do you want to go, man? Because we could go all over the place here. We've got a lot on the table.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the Rittenhouse thing, because by the time our listeners are hearing this, the verdict could be in. But I do think, I'll say this before we know what the verdict is. Mm-hmm. It's so freaking clear to me, this kid ought to be let go on self-defense. I mean, and we've seen a lot of this commentary since the trial started about how badly the media misrepresented what actually happened in Kenosha. I mean,
actively. I mean, I think that's really kind of what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I believe, I haven't read this exactly myself. I just read a discussion about it. Nellie Bowles, who is the partner of Barry Weiss, she used to work for the Times. Yep. She said the other day that the Times repressed her reporting on the damage in Kenosha until after the election, or after they withheld it for political reasons.
Yeah, in fact, she said they did not publish her piece, and for no reason, right? No given reason. They did not publish her piece for until after the election of Joe Biden as president of the United States.
I mean, this is yet another instance in which the institution of the mainstream media discredits itself. And
okay,
go ahead.
Okay, so you say that it discredits itself. And I think if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, that's pretty clear. However, I want to point out that it doesn't seem like being discredited for not discharging your responsibilities appropriately no longer seems to come at any kind of price to the people who perpetrate it. I personally believe that it comes at a great price for our country and for our communities. but there doesn't seem to be a price that's paid within the cathedral, so to speak, right?
No. And you can go back to something like the American generals who kept screwing up in Afghanistan and who kept lying about it. We know from the Afghan papers that the Washington Post got leaked and published that they lied and they lied and they lied to Congress and the public for years about how things were going in Afghanistan. We withdraw from Afghanistan badly. And who's paying a price for that? The only person that I've seen pay any kind of price was that Marine Corps lieutenant colonel, I think he was,
who spoke up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and so, but this too, the military is discrediting itself. Just this past week, Kale, I was out in Colorado Springs doing some stuff at Focus on the Family. And while I was in the town, I met, I talked to a guy who put me in touch with a guy from the U.S. Air Force Academy. And it turns out that there's some men, some officers who have been discharged from the Air Force Academy for refusing to teach critical race theory and wokeness. And I'm working on this story.
At their academies? Is it at their academy?
At the Air Force Academy, yeah.
Wow.
And so this is a story I'm working on, but it's just incredible. My source, I ended up talking to one of the guys. He sent me some documentation and video of the stuff that they were expected to teach there. And you look at this, Kale, and you and I talk about wokeness all the time.
Yeah.
You realize the depth to which it has penetrated our elite service academies. And I got to tell you, once the American people begin to understand, if they ever are told, I'll do my best, how deep this stuff goes in the service academies, then it will be another institution for us to lose faith in.
Well, what I find interesting, you have often used, I think is it Bogman's term, liquid modernity?
Zygmunt Bauman, yeah.
Bauman's term of liquid modernity. And what I find interesting, I know I'm sort of borrowing that metaphor to use this, but I think of critical race, CRT and all this sort of critical theory stuff. Again, I'm very familiar with because I went to graduate school in the 90s. So I that's all I read, for the love of God. So I'm very familiar with all of this body of work. And what I am finding fascinating is that it has this ability to seep in and soak itself into almost everything. So that, like, when I think of liquid modernity, I think of it's this sort of this acid solvent or something that creeps in and infects and invades everything that it touches. And I have yet to see any kind of in the public square, any kind of ability for institutions to inoculate themselves. The only institutions that have been able to kind of inoculate themselves from it is really sort of consciously conservative or consciously traditional institutions. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of it. Yeah. Right. And we're already, those institutions are already marginal, right? They're not mainstream. By definition, they're not mainstream. So I don't know what is in the mainstream that will be able to keep this liquid modernity from corroding everything. I really don't. And I don't mean to sound like an alarmist, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of check.
Yeah, you do. No, and because you should be an alarmist, because this is incredibly alarming. You're talking about critical theory, the critical theory mindset, this hypercritical mindset that infects everything. Well, I believe it was Robin DiAngelo, the white fragility author, who said when you confront any situation, you shouldn't ask, is there racism here? You should rather ask, how does racism manifest itself in this situation? Can you imagine going through the world like that? But this is what you have to do if you take the critical theory mindset. Nothing can be what it actually is. It all has to be seen as an icon of subversion. In the same way, Kale, you have critical race theory on one side, or critical theory in general.
Yeah, right.
This other queer theory is the other hand of this. I was just thinking this morning before we came on, I was reading a piece by Carl Trueman in First Things magazine. We're going to have Carl on in a future episode real soon.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how Georgetown queered Veterans Day. And like, wait, really? Sure enough, you live
Go ahead. I'm all ears.
No. They Georgetown University, the nominally Catholic college in Washington. You might have heard of it.
In the Jesuit tradition.
Yeah, in the Jesuit tradition. Yeah, they celebrated Veterans Day by honoring queer veterans. That's
right.
It's like they couldn't just celebrate Veterans Day. No. We have to queer Veterans Day. I read last night an article, an academic piece, and I'm going to put this on my blog later. But our listeners may have seen it by now, about queering the Arctic. A bunch of academics are trying to see, how are icebergs queer? How are Eskimos queer? I was like, what the freak? But there's a point here. It's not just old man yelling at a cloud.
Right. This is important. Yeah.
No, it's a serious point. But critical race theory or critical theory causes you to question everything through a certain hermeneutic. Queer theory, same thing. Queer theory intends to sexualize and turn everything upside down and take everything that's normative and make it non-normative and vice versa. So when you combine critical theory and queer theory, you get a world turned into absolute chaos. And you get what Nietzsche called, although he wasn't talking about this in specific, calls the revaluation of all values.
Right, the transvaluation, yeah.
Transvaluation of all values. And that's what we're living through right now. The fact that more people aren't alarmed is itself alarming.
So I agree. I think that the more corrosive of the two, if we're looking at critical race theory and critical queer theory, I personally believe that again, I'm talking about these as intellectual models, right? Constructs with which to approach the world. I think the critical queer theory is much more and ultimately corrosive, because it trumps race in an interesting way. I'm not talking popularly. I'm not talking about, I think that the critical race theory has sort of the public ear. But if you really are looking at these intellectual constructs, it's the queering of all things, which is, I think, has as its goal it's ultimately, if you'll follow here, mentally contraceptive. In other words, the design, the intent is to sterilize culture.
Go ahead. It's what Philip Reeve called a death work.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think he's so right about the death work thing.
Well, and think about what queer theory does. It makes you taking the critical race theory approach to everything, or the critical theory approach, but queering it means that it's all about deconstructing sexual identity, sexual categories to make everything
cis-normative patriarchy. Yeah.
Right. And here to make everything that was solid melt into liquid. This is liquid modernity applied to the body, to sexual desire.
Exactly.
And what you get from this is you get a population that can't reproduce. It can't
and won't. Right. It can't and won't. Like there's this interesting, you lose functionality, but you also lose desire and intent. And I do think that and those are the two kind of foundations or pillars of a civilization, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm starting to see what this guy told me, and I said this on my blog before, back in 2015, after a few months after the Obergefell ruling, I was at a private meeting in which I was called to talk about the Benedict options. There's a bunch of Christian donors to an organization. Yeah. The other guy there was an evangelical. He was a professor at a college. This was all, on off the record, so I can't give any details. But one thing he did say was that, Christians took it in the neck with the Obergefell, and this was a serious thing to knock off the Christian idea of marriage, but it's not remotely the serious thing. The most serious thing is if we lose the gender binary. And the rest of us are like, why? No, I mean, you kind of sense it. Yeah, that's a big deal, but why? And he said, because so much in our civilization depends on the gender binary, so much that we don't even think about it because we never have had to think about it. Well, when we lose a gender binary, if we should lose it, he said, then suddenly it's going to come popping out at us in ways that we didn't anticipate in a very destructive way. Well, I think we're living through that now.
Yeah, so you don't need to lose the gender binary. right? You just need to knock off, 30% of the so-called gender binary to have a radical influence on, actual civilization. I know people sort of talk about this, but, having babies and raising them in stable homes is kind of important. One might even say foundational to a civilization. And the fact that we have abandoned this as again, normative telos for human beings is really frightening. I remember I think you just blogged about this maybe a few days ago, but there was a Nazi of a priest of the Church of England who dared suggest on his Twitter feed that guys, fellow church people, let's have babies.
Babies are good.
Babies are good. This is hardly a controversial point, one would think, especially given, it's embedded right there at the beginning of Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply is kind of a thing. And yet he, as you point out, was pilloried massively, like literally, I think called a Nazi, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, by
other priests
of the Church of England.
Other priests. Okay.
Well, can I tell you this? Just before you and I came on to record this morning, I got a message from him. He's being arraigned by his diocese for that. Yep.
Arraigned? Like formally?
Biased. I guess he's being brought up on spiritual charges because of that tweet. Yep.
Okay. Remind us just real quick what this innocuous tweet was.
Well, as you said, it was something to the effect of everybody, Christians, people should have as many children as they can. Children are good. That's all he said, and he was dogpiled by clergy for causing trauma to people and hurting people by that.
So I just found the tweet, right? And so it says, this is, can I say his name?
Yeah. Father Jamie Franklin.
Father Jamie Franklin. He says, as a priest in the Church of England, I recommend that every married couple has as many children as they possibly can. It is one of life's most wonderful things. And he quotes Psalm 127, lo, sons are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Wow, what a first-class a-hole. My goodness. What a really truly a Nazi. I mean, I can
Dr. Goebbels could have written that himself.
I feel unsafe. I feel really unsafe that he would suggest such awful things like encouraging the faithful to have children. I mean, what kind of upside down clown world insanity is this priest being arraigned?
But that's just it, Kale. That's exactly what we're talking about. When you have a church, the established Church of England, where a priest saying, have babies, go forth and multiply, be fruitful and multiply. And that gets him dogpiled by other clergy in public, and then having to answer for this informal charges in his church. It's what we're talking about here, right?
So play the queer theory game here. What would the queer theorist say about that tweet? Like, how would you play this game?
Yeah, well, I would say that it reinforces cis heteronormative sexualities or something. You can come
and it's traumatizing to those who can't have kids.
Well, that's what some of them said. Or those who choose not to. Why should they be made to feel bad for, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about compassion. Right. This is what I keep banging on about soft totalitarianism. It's totalitarianism that is coming to us in the guise of compassion. But when you have when a priest of a church cannot praise childbearing without bringing down the judgment of all his peers and being brought up on charges within the church, that everything has been turned upside down.
Right. And so one of the things you're hearing now more than ever, it used to be sort of, there's a lot of conversation about trans, but the phrase that is becoming more prominent is this sort of non-binary language, right? That sort of, and you'll see on very online spaces, shockingly, NBs, and, the letter N, the letter B, as in non-binaries. And this is, again, the ultimate move for the queer theorist is that, it is no longer male and female, he created them, but rather it is just some sort of liquid, fluid other.
Yeah, the desiring creature, non-specific desiring creature.
Right. And this so, I mean, I imagine, so I imagine like my dad listening to this podcast right now. Happy birthday, Dad. Today's his 80th birthday. I think he must, my dad's a smart man. He's a retired attorney and, well-read and all this sort of stuff. But, he doesn't, get involved in this kind of stuff. But he's just, he's busy walking the dog and doing his crossword puzzles and living his life as is his earned right.
Eating steak.
And eating steak at Ruth's Chris, but he must. Maybe I should call him up and ask him, like, Dad, like, what do you make of all this sort of stuff? Because it's so crazy, it's so counterintuitive, it's so counter civilizational, it's so insane that only someone who's been reprogrammed by the social media algorithms can start to believe that this stuff is real.
Well, and it's so subversive. Just this week, we've heard from Abigail Schreier. I don't know if you saw her most recent thing.
I was hoping you bring this up, actually.
Yeah, Abigail was leaked documents by some people out in California that there were some teachers in a school district in California who had a day-long conference about how to queer, how to sneak queer things into schools, queering elementary schools and high schools and so forth.
Totally normal activity, right? Totally normal to queer in elementary school. Good job, guys. Way to go.
Yeah. Well, and in these documents and in the transcript of the trainings, they talk openly about how we can bring this to little kids, how we can get around parents, how we can stymie conservative parents and all that. And it's just like, you read this, why the hell aren't the parents all down at the schools right now demanding resignations? Because these teachers are coming in there intentionally trying to queer these kids and to disrupt family lines of authority. I mean, this is, I hate to say it, but
for what? But what are they doing it for?
Yeah, but for liberation, for compassion. Yeah. But this is what the Soviets did when they came in. They didn't try to queer everything, but they did try to sever the links between parents and children. So the state would be your parent, not your actual parents. There's this revolutionary impulse on the left to deny parental authority, especially patriarchal authority, because they see it as getting in the way of the transformation, the radical transformation they want to see. This is happening in America now. And I tell you, I hope to God that the awakening that has happened in suburban Virginia, Northern Virginia this fall, with parents realizing what was being done to their kids in the schools and raising hell, I hope that spreads nationwide.
I'm skeptical, Rod, because I think that people are fundamentally small c conservative in terms of their outlook on things. I don't mean politically. I mean just sort of the one's basic standpoint to the world is, you don't want to think that things are as crazy as you fear them to be. And so I think people have a tendency to minimalize these stories and until it happens to them, I think people tend to think, oh, that's the kind of crazy stuff that happens over there. And, this, and I just think that people continually default to this, oh, it can't be that crazy, whereas you have, canaries in a coal mine like yourself and like me, who always get accused of being, crazy and we're hypersensitive and this is just an indication of our own sort of hidden racism and our hidden bigotry toward LGBTQ plus, that all of this is just, it's all projected onto us as we're the crazy ones. We're the ones who,
it's the gaslighting, the regressive gaslighting.
Right. Yeah. And it, which is very effective. I mean, it works, I think. In the end, I do think it works. So I just worry, the folks in Virginia certainly did react, I think, appropriately to what they saw throughout the pandemic in their kids' Zoom classrooms. And Terry McAuliffe certainly did the fascinating move of doubling down with it and saying that parents do not have a right to or a say with what their kids are learning in school. Wow, that was an incredible miscalculation. But
That's what they really think.
Right.
That is what they think.
But I guess my point here is that I agree that is exactly what they think. But most people right now still seem, normie world still seems to understand that our children belong to us as parents. I think that in more, coastal sectors, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. Elite sectors, however you want to characterize this, the ruling class sectors, I don't think they understand flyover country as the domain of their parents. I think they see them as theirs.
Yeah, well, it's happening in so many different places. You're talking about normies. I live in deep Trumplandia here in Louisiana, but this stuff is happening here too. But people, again, they just think this. I think about what Solzhenitsyn said. Solzhenitsyn said at the beginning of the 1983 edition of Gulag Archipelago, he said that people around the world think that what happened in Russia couldn't happen here. He said, in fact, it could happen in any country on earth under the right set of circumstances. And the same is true about the queering and the critical theorization, if you will, of society here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I get stories from time to time about some of the schools. I mean, the thing is, I don't know how widespread it is in the schools here, but I do know that the last people who will be willing to believe it will be the people who send their kids there, because most people are so hard pressed just to, pay the rent, pay the bills.
Yeah.
And they don't want to have to worry about their kids' schools turning them queer.
Right.
And yet, as we know in California, this has been happening. They've set out to do this, and if it's happening in California, it's not going to stay in California.
So, what kind of reaction was the reaction to Shire's piece predictable?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't. It just came as you and I are talking. It just came out the day before.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is it'll be dismissed as two things, right? Not true. And at the same time as it is not true, it's just a sign of Abigail Schreier's like sexual hangups or something like that.
Well, you brought up at the top of our podcast about David Brooks's big piece in the Atlantic Monthly about he went to the National Conservatism Convention, and this is what he saw. And I ran into David there. He and I are old friends. We had a great talk, and I thought, this is not really his crowd. Well, he said in his piece, this is not really my crowd, but everybody was really nice to me. I didn't expect that. But he was pretty critical of the event. And the main focus of his criticism was that people are angry about things that aren't really that big a deal. And I was floored by that because, and again, David, a lot of people think David is a bad actor. He's not. He's a deeply decent man. But I think, and again, he's a dear friend, but I think he's a prisoner of his class and his geography. He lives in Washington. He's upper middle class, and he's already gone over on to the progressive side on race and LGBT. So I think he just has no appreciation for how radical this stuff sounds to normies.
Yeah, I agree, and I like that idea of him being a sort of a prisoner of his own class, and it's something that I try really hard not to do that myself. You and I are both social conservatives, but I know that you read widely and follow a bunch of different perspectives, as do I, and I wonder if somebody like David, I don't think they fully appreciate what they don't know.
Right.
Like, there's this weird lack of humility on their part. I don't mean he's not a humble guy. Like he's kind.
No, he is. He is a very kind man. But intellectually, you're talking about.
Yeah, because even in that piece, he like the woke stuff comes up, and he's like and repeated the canard that it doesn't exist. It's like, what planet do you live on? Like, honestly, how can you say that?
Yeah, but you know, this is the same class of people who said in after the Trump victory in 2016, they're like, we didn't see it coming, because they literally didn't. And David himself wrote to me and said, you know what, I was trying to tell him about things going on that I was seeing living in Louisiana. This was long before Trump. And he wrote to me and said, you know what, you were right about that. We in our business have to pay more attention to the things that are coming apart. And yet Trump seems, the effect of the Trump presidency seems to have driven so many of our elite journalists, and not just brand names like David Brooks, but people, the normies whose names you don't even know, but whose bylines appear in the New York Times and the Washington Post, it's driven them even more into their created, curated world.
So, you know, you brought up Solzhenitsyn and his insistence that it can happen here, and that you have to constantly tell yourself that, quote, it can happen here. You know, people forget, I think people forget maybe that, you know, Germany, pre-war Germany, and, you know, you've written a lot about this, and Hannah Arendt is great on this as well. But people forget that Germany was literally the most sophisticated, the most educated, you know, the elite of Europe, going into going into the 30s. You know, even out of World War I, they were far and away the most sophisticated and most educated population. And yet they themselves became prone to this sort of strange admixture of neo-paganism and progressive politics, in such a way that, you know, they stole a nation and arguably stole a continent.
Yeah, well, and what they did with National Socialist ideology, it gave people a way to frame the chaos that they were living with a post-war massive inflation, the breakdown of social norms. It gave people an explanation for that. And
so inflation, you know, norms, like, we are, folks, gosh, I know you might get tired of me and Rod sort of prattling on about this stuff, but we are primed for exactly the same conditions. You know, and then people are pretending like, oh, inflation, so a couple of rich guys, hedge funds, are gonna, you know, lose little value, boo hoo. And it's like, no. Like, I'm poor, right? I'm a teacher. Like, you know, when I go to the grocery store and, you know, my you know, 3-pound package of ground meat has gone from $8 to $17, it's like, that's a big freaking deal for me. Big deal.
Why do you hate Joe Biden so much? That you would invent these lies. But there's a point I want to stay on
Please,
here
go ahead.
with the Nazis. The Nazis came to power in part because they appealed to the sense of betrayal and disorder among a generation of young German men who had suffered defeat in the war, and they didn't. And all their prospects had been destroyed by hyperinflation and things like that. And the Nazis told them, this is why it happened. This is whose fault it is. This is who you should hate. Come stand by the Fuhrer and we will rebuild Germany, etc. Of course, it was a lie.
Right. But it's nihilism masked as meaning.
Right. But here's the point I want to make. Just last night in my conversation at dinner, Ed and I were talking about how many young men there are today who just are failing to thrive. And Ed was talking about what he sees in his life and about how this is just a really worrying thing, that so many young men are sidetracked by weed, by porn, by whatever. Young women are just lapping them, just going round and round. But the men are failing to thrive because partly it's their fault, partly it's that we have demonized them in this culture. And this is a revolutionary rabble, a pre-revolutionary rabble, if you follow history.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I am, you know, I don't think it's, you know, quote unquote, their fault. I do think, you know, this is where I'm going to borrow some lingo from our friends on the left. I do think that there are sort of systematic cultural things in place that are really working against the thriving of young men. I mean, if you look at all of the markers, the mental health markers and the thriving markers, it is astounding how lopsided it is now. And yeah, like, we can sit here and make fun of the dude who plays, you know, Minecraft or whatever, you know, in his mom's basement and all those sorts of things. And look, you know, one of the most moving things about the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon is he seems to be able to speak specifically to those young men who are really staring into the abyss of nihilism, are really staring into the abyss of meaninglessness. And he has found a way to speak to them. And I'm inspired by that personally. But, for my entire adult life, we've lived in, are we in third wave feminism now? I forget which wave we're in, but I don't even mean that tongue in cheek, although it did come out funny, I suppose. But I mean, all my entire life, it has all been about, getting women in STEM and supporting women. And all those are worthy things. I have no problem with, giving men and women opportunities that would sort of transcend sort of default positions. But, all of this talk about supporting women in STEM, et cetera, and no real serious talk about the crisis that men find themselves in. And it's real, and it's going to have massive impacts on cultural stability. It is, in fact, I would argue that the question, the problem that civilization rises up to meet is, how are men and women to get along? Right. It's at the heart of our epics. It's at the heart of our scriptures. It's at the heart of our dramas. This is a problem. Men and women are a problem, and we have to find a way to negotiate, right? There can't be winners. So this is another thing that Peterson is so good about. It's like, you can't win in an argument, for instance, with your wife or with your husband. Right, because if you win, then she loses, or if you win, he loses, and then what do you have? No, it's about negotiating genuine difference in order to find a way to kind of get along, to create some kind of stable place. That's what civilization is, and so that's why I think this is really problematic, really dangerous in terms of the lack of thriving men, but also it goes back to this question that we've had about non-binary and queer theory, and the way that this is meant to corrode the foundations of where is our terra firma in which we can negotiate how to get along as a species, as a culture.
Exactly, and it's meant to neuter the male, and to render the female to psychologically damaged to mate, to reproduce. Correct. I mean, this stuff is. I mean, you and I are both Christians, but I think this stuff is literally demonic.
Yeah. But, well, and even Rod, I know that's a sort of a buzzword, right? But when what we also mean by demonic is the tearing apart, right? Is the ripping apart, and the isolation, diabolus. That is exactly right, and that is what it is. And we can dress it up in spiritual lingo if we'd like, and I think that applies. Of course, I do. I'm a Christian, but even sort of more fundamental than that, even on a psychological level, it is meant to rip apart and to keep apart. Because nothing thrives when, even just think about that literally, like if a man and a woman can't get together, life and perpetuation of the species can't happen.
Yeah. Well, it's you talking about the diabolic aspect of this. This reminds me of the reading I did in cultural studies about pre-revolutionary Russia. And in the first decade of the 20th century, the elite culture there, the historians talk about how diabolic it was. And they're not talking about that it was literally diabolic, but it was diabolic in the sense that you mentioned, that the cultural elites were so enamored of destruction, just tearing things apart for the sake of seeing them fall. And even in early 20th century Russia, Satan became a heroic figure. None of these people believed in him, but they said he was the individualist who tore down everything to exercise his will and to make himself free of the gods. Right. Well, Hannah Arendt said that this is what happened in Russia and this is what happened in Germany. The elites wanted to tear everything down just for the pleasure of seeing those people who were kept marginalized, to let them rush in. We are reliving this right now. And the fact that I can look out my window here, my living room as we're talking, everything seems peaceful outside. I don't think it's going to last.
I have serious reservations. And look, nothing is going to add sort of more tinder to this. Like if we have a serious run, which it looks like is going to happen, a serious run at inflation. Like, I am genuinely worried. Just me personally. I'm a teacher. Like we're a single income family. Like my money is literally worth, I'm losing money, even the small amount of money I have in my checking account right now. It's like literally losing value as we talk, since we started this podcast. But I'm deeply worried about social cohesion, if all of this other stuff that we're talking about, is added on to it, or is accelerated by inflation. It's not good, I don't think.
Right. No, and if we have created a world, or rather the left, and by the left, I mean to the ruling class, because culturally they're on the left, they've created a world in which all of us have to be suspicious of everybody else.
Yeah.
And you have to be so afraid to say anything to your neighbor, because who's to say your neighbor is not going to interpret what you say in the worst possible way and ruin your life on social media for it?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the tinderbox you're talking about, where everybody is afraid of everybody else, because the institutions of our society, the media, the universities, corporations, even the U.S. military, are making us all hyper aware of our differences and weaponizing them.
Right. So community is rendered impossible. And look, you and I, we've talked about this before. You wrote a whole book about it. We're Dante fans, but we don't have to wait to die to get to hell. We know the insight, I think, for Dante is that we live in hell. Actually, this is where we are. And if you look at the city of Dis in the Inferno, it's like everything that you need in order to have a kind of a community. An ordered community, every necessary element is twisted and turned into its opposite ultimate, so that it becomes, the city of Dis just simply means the not city, and of course, city for Dante means community, right? So it's the not community, and we are really in this sort of hyper accelerated, AI algorithm infused non-place. It's a tough cocktail, man.
Well, two things about. I'm so glad you brought up Dante. In the city of it's not in the city of Dis, but in the Inferno, Dante goes into the circle of sodomites. That's the word he uses. Where people. And what's interesting about that is Dante doesn't really talk about gay sex.
No, he's right. Not at all.
The sodomites are punished for not being fruitful.
Yeah,
within the structure of the poem,
right.
And what's so interesting about that is Dante meets his mentor, who had been his mentor in real life, Brunetto Latini. And Latini comes and talks to him, and comes out of the line of the men walking round and round in the desert infernally. And he says, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you, my beloved pupil. Keep reaching for the stars, chase your own glory." And
follow your dreams.
Follow your dreams. You listen to what Brunetto Latini says, and you're like, yeah, that's the sort of thing you would hear at a normal high school graduation today.
Totally.
But what Dante, the poet, is trying to tell us there is that this hyper focus on the self and on the self's glory, it leads to sterility.
That's right.
And this man, Brunetto Latini, had become great in life, but his basic ethos was sterile, because it was not getting out of yourself.
Yeah, it bore no fruit, right? I mean,
bore no fruit.
And of course, the perfect irony is that nobody knows who Brunetto Latini is, except that he's a character in Dante's poem. And yet this was a man who was, had achieved fame and glory in his time. And it's like, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah. So I guess coming at it from the Dantean perspective here, the queering of our civilization began when the me generation started 50, 60 years ago. Whenever you start focusing on yourself and not outside yourself to some higher values, whether it's God or some other ideal that brings you out of yourself, then this is inevitable. We have gotten to the end of the road. Now, one more Dante point I wanted to make. I can see we're running out of time. But, and I think it's Canto. It's midway through the Purgatorio, where Dante gets to the terrace where the sin of wrath, of anger, is purged, the tendency to anger, and he meets Marco the Lombard, and there's smoke everywhere.
You can't see.
And he says, Marco, I've come from the world, which is Tuscany, and it's family against family, city against city. It's total chaos. What? Give me some word I can go back and we can help fix this. And Marcos says, brother, the world is blind, and you come from that world too. In other words, he's saying, don't think that you're not compromised by this. But he says that you all think that things couldn't be otherwise, but in fact, God gave you free will. And if you resist your desires, if you sacrifice your desires to the higher good and you rebuild order in your own life and then spread it out into your house and your community, that is where the rebirth happens. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't.
But that's
right now,
but that's downright Petersonian, right? Clean your room, right?
clean your
It
room.
really is.
Yeah,
And I
start by
mean that
cleaning your room.
in a non-trite fashion, like clean your room.
Man, that is profound.
Yeah.
And that is the way that I think sitting here, from my couch, from where I blog, everything seems so chaotic, like it's falling apart, and it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we should take responsibility and order the things that we can order, that is within our purview, and build out from there. It's one thing to go online and be all very online about is the liberal order worth saving and all that. And I'm a big part of that. I think those discussions are important, actually, but they're not as important, Kale, as cleaning your room, cleaning your house, ordering your own life and ordering the life of your family, helping order the life in your parish, and so on and so forth.
Right. And I think that in your sphere, in your home, amongst your, sort of local as you can get, talking about the goodness of I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the binary is actually quite good. Radical. But we said this the other day. We don't know what we are for, but we do, right? We do know that we are meant for communion and we are meant to procreate. And I mean that at its sort of most, at the most fundamental level. And so how can you achieve fellowship, and how can you create life? And of course, we can create life literally by having children, but also how am I a life giver, life creator in my circles, with my students, with my own children, with my wife? I mean, how can I create life in where I am? And sort of at some level, and the online space be damned. It's a tough thing because I have found so much fellowship online. For me, social media has been an incredible lifeline for me personally.
For me too.
And so I realize that it's somewhat of a convoluted bag. But I always take Peterson to mean when he says clean your own room, literally clean your own room, but you have to start here and work your way out. And if that makes him some sort of dismissible liberal, then I guess I'm just a dismissible liberal.
Well, Enlightenment liberal, as he was called. But no, I mean, that's just it. It's reestablishing agency, and it's a powerful thing. I mean, it's like when I've lost weight, I'm on a new diet now, but when I've lost weight, I felt so good about myself. And it's not so much because I look better, that's part of it, but mostly it's like, you know what? I wasn't defeated by my own immoderate appetites. I was able to exercise some agency there and get myself in better shape. And I think look, this is, as I mentioned, we're in the fast period now. This is what fasting is like. It's supposed to be about in the liturgical year. It's not about missing food or not eating this. That's just the outer thing. Inwardly, it's about reestablishing spiritual order. It's about making sure that God and the higher spiritual values are that you have ordered the fleshly desires to these higher ideals. And even though I fell rather dramatically last night at Risk Chris,
but fellowship is real. Fellowship is important too, dude.
It is. Yeah, it's like, and I think my priest would have said, he would have blessed that because, as our Orthodox priest will tell you at the beginning of the big Lenten fast, they'll say don't forget, it's not about just not eating. He said the demons don't eat either.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and I think that we are to be fruitful and free. And what I see, the real awful lie that I see being sold to our fellows and our children is that you're not really free, that you are bound by binaries, you are bound by cis heteronormative patriarchal structures and systems, and that is a lie. We are not bound by those things, right? The culture is a gift, and we are free. I can't imagine as a teacher spending my time not building my kids up for freedom and agency, and rather preaching to them that you're a victim, that the man is out to get you, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, who does that?
Right. Freedom, we get freedom through norms and disciplines that enable us to exercise control over our passions. Something as simple as this week, starting to use the Noom app. Simple as it is, I've been amazed by it. Only way I've used it this week, I've just gotten started, is counting calories. I was absolutely shocked by how, once I started paying attention about how much I ate. It's like, I thought I eat pretty well, but it turns out that I've gotten so fat because I eat immoderately and throughout the day. But
unconsciously, right? Yeah, I mean,
unconsciously,
Noom is so good about just sort of, this is not a paid advertisement, folks, I assure you. But Noom, it allows you to become conscious, because so much of our automatic behaviors, our sort of lived algorithms, if you will, are unconscious.
But for me, by the end of the week, just getting used to it, I was so amazed by this and I felt so much better because it has given me the tools to exercise agency over my own gluttony. That is my besetting sin. When I read the Purgatory, I'm like, oh yeah, I know which one.
There I am. Yeah.
But no, it has been not a matter of captivity, but just the things, the yoke that I've willingly taken on by this weight loss app has made me feel like I have so much power and agency, and it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm not ruled by my desires, but rather I can impose through force of will, and I would say by the grace of God, control over my desires.
Right. And that's the liberating power of truth, right? One of the reasons why we all have to orient ourselves to and by the truth is that the truth sets you free. I mean, I know these sound like they're cliches, but it's real, right? And so by becoming aware of the truth, for instance, of what you just talked about with Noom, it's like, oh my God, I can control that. I can see that. I have power. I have agency. I'm not a victim. And anytime I'm sort of falling into that noonday devil of a maelstrom, it's always because I'm sensing or feeling somehow that I'm a victim. And that's a dangerous siren song, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's like what Dr. Kirchmary, one of the anti-communist dissidents that I write about in Live Not by Laws, it's like what he said in his memoir, that when the communists put him in prison for being leader of the underground church, he had to decide that he could never pity himself, never allow himself to be resentful, because if he did, he would lose it. And there is such profound
self-pity is death, man.
And he had the right to feel sorry for himself because they were torturing him. They put him in jail, but he knew, he had the foresight to realize that self-pity is death.
Yeah.
Well, look, I can't think of a good segue, but I got to go to the airport.
Yeah. You go. No, that's good. This is, I think, a good end. I think, given hopefully the folks lots to sort of chew on. As always, everyone, you can see Rod on the American Conservative, his blog. I'm sure everybody knows how to get there. I'm on Twitter at Kale Zeldin. You're at Rod Dreher, right?
At Rod Dreher,
for Twitter, and Rod's got his Substack. And so look, and you can always leave comments on the bottom of these videos, or if you get it, I don't actually know where the audio podcast goes. I should look into that.
The line is wherever you get your podcast.
Wherever you get your podcast, that's the line, right? So look, let us know what you think, and please subscribe and share with friends and do all that sort of stuff. So all right, Rod, until then.
Don't get nothing on you.